Next up is our program. And this evening follows a little different format than usual. If anyone has seen some of our solo presenters in the past, you're familiar with it. Our speaker will present for about half an hour or so, then open it up to discussion and Q&A. And Rob Stappen, one of the HIE founders and president of the Clinical Hypnosis Society of New Jersey, also author of More Common Therapy, the Experiential Psychotherapy of Jeffrey K. Zeig. Did I get it right, Rob? He is the one who has the pleasure of not only introducing our speaker this evening, but also he will be the discussant and facilitate the Q&A for us. So thank you so much, Rob, for jumping in, playing discussant Q&A moderator this evening. And without further ado, we'll hand the mic over to you.
Thank you, Dana. It's always a pleasure to be with you all. If you've attended the HIE in the past, you will always notice the flowery introduction that the speakers get. And so when I say that it is really my pleasure to introduce Dan Short, that is not a flowery introduction. Dan is, I think, one of the most creative thinkers in our field, and I am really excited to have the opportunity to hang out with you and talk with you this evening and hear the things that you've got to say. For those of you who don't know Dan, Dan is the guy that did the core competency series that is probably one of the best teaching tools for those who want to enhance their own skills in the use of hypnosis and help people learn more about what it is that we do hypnotically. I was talking with Dan at the Erickson Congress in 2019. We were having lunch together, and he just made passing reference to this book that he was working on that was about William James and Milton Erickson. And I thought, wow, what an interesting combination. And then the book came out, and Dan's book, From William James to Milton Erickson, The Care of Human Consciousness, is a beautifully crafted and curated study of the parallels and the similarities between Erickson and William James. And it's just one of the things that cements Dan as one of the true free thinkers in our field. And so, Dan, it's really my pleasure to have you join us, and I am just so looking forward to what you have to share. And I'll remind you to unmute yourself before you Great. Anyway, take it away, Dan. I'll talk to you at the end of your presentation. We'll field questions at that time.
Well, thanks, Rob, for such a lovely introduction. I don't know if I've ever had such a nice introduction before. That was spectacular. Okay, so today's topic is the future of hypnosis, and I'll share with you a humorous exchange. I thought it was humorous between me and Jeff Zeig back in 2001. I'd just been asked to come to the Erickson Foundation and start cataloging and archiving Milton Erickson's recordings, which took me 2 years, listening 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. It took 2 years to listen to all the recordings and get them all cataloged and preserved. And so I definitely had Erickson in my head at that point. But I was one day curious about the future of hypnosis, and Jeff was available in his office. And so I just, in passing, said, what's your prediction for hypnosis 10 years from now? And so that would have been, it would have been about 2010. I was asking for what he predicted at that point. It was 2001. And he said, at such and such evolution, I was talking to Bernheim. And he said to me, there's no faster way to make a fool of oneself than to make predictions about the future. And then he turned and walked away. So I was left wondering, well, what is the future of hypnosis? I think this is a reasonable question and to ask ourselves. And I will risk making a fool of myself here today. So maybe what I say doesn't come to pass, but I'm going to make this prediction in the most science-based and statistically smart way possible, or at least that I know of, in order to make this statement. And when I talk to you about the future of hypnosis, I'm not going to really go on and on about it. I am going to just make one single simple statement at the very end of the presentation, and that'll be what I perceive as the future of hypnosis. But in order to understand that statement, I need to start with and do much more work on discussing what exactly is hypnosis. Because how do we say what the future of something is when we don't even fully have it grasped yet? And to fully grasp what is hypnosis, we really need to be willing to go back in time to anything that seems to coherently represent hypnosis. So it's that kind of idea of going back to the future. If you want to know your future, you got to know your past. This gets into statistically smart ways of predicting things based on the work of the psychologist Paul Meehl. And Paul Meehl is known for really applying this concept that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And the way he came to that conclusion was by looking at all the different ways that psychologists are trying to predict behavior. So with personality inventories, or with behavioral analysis, or with doing interviews, a psychosocial interview, or he looked at all the different ways that you can get a psychologist can go about trying to predict future behavior. And they saw he looked at what worked best and what turned out to be the most accurate predictors of future behavior. And what he found was, and argued for fairly convincingly, was that if you get a person's psychosocial history and you see rather strong patterns of behavior in the past, that predicts future behavior better than anything else, which is kind of discouraging for those of us that think of ourselves as agents of change. Because it's like, well, it almost sounds like it's saying people don't change. But one of the things that Paul Meehl clarified was that your predictors are most accurate when you also look at the contingencies. So under X set of circumstances, Y behavior will occur. But under Z set of circumstances, Q behavior will occur. So when you're looking at context and noticing what context in which behavioral patterns show up, then you can get really good about predicting future behavior. And I found that to work very well, incredibly well. If I get a person to give me a little bit of context, not necessarily even about themselves, but about their partner, who they're married to, or their child or whatnot, and they're trying to understand what to expect next, you get just a little bit of history and a little bit of context and know what was kind of triggering these behaviors. And I can predict a behavior, and the person will come back more times than not and say, how did you know that was going to happen? It seems like you can see into the future. You were so spot on. And the thing is, it's just a reoccurring pattern. That's why, within the context of not only Ericksonian therapy, but also some cognitive behavioral therapists are starting to look at this, or researchers, is interrupting behavioral patterns. And that's where we see change starting to occur, is when you change the context or you interrupt the patterns of behavior, and then you start getting some new behavior. So the statement doesn't mean that people can't change. Don't take it that way. But what it does mean is, if you don't want to make a fool of yourself, your safest bet for predicting the future of something is looking at its past. And so we're going to do that with hypnosis. And I'm going to start off with just asking the question, what is hypnosis? Is it this? Is it that? Is it this? Is it that? Is it this? Is it that? And then we'll get to my prediction for the future. And I've got some slides. I'm going to see if this, yes, I do have permission to share here. So I'm going to share this right quick. I need that to get out of my way. I need that bar to move. It's not going to move, so I'll just see if I can. No, I see what I want to get to, but I can't get it to move. I can't get everything. Oh, there we go. There's another button. All right. What is hypnosis? First question is, I still really want this out of my way so I don't have it. My Zoom skills here are being put to the test. And okay. Is hypnosis a procedure? So let's see if we can answer that question. One of the things that I think is important for us to recognize about hypnosis is that it has limitless variation. So if we go all the way back to Mesmer, we see people being presumably put into some sort of trance or hypnotized or worked with using suggestion by simply doing magnetic passes with the wand. And that was what it would take in order to achieve what we would call today hypnosis. The other, we look at Abia Faria, and he would use commands to sleep in order to achieve hypnosis. We look at Charcot, the famous Charcot out of Paris. He would use physical shock to induce hypnosis, such as shining a bright light in someone's eyes or clanging gong behind him, or other kinds of violent ways of shocking the person and in order to get them into a state of hypnosis. James Braid very famously introduced the concept of using eye fixation, and that's how we achieve hypnosis, is by maybe getting someone to look at a bottle or getting someone to look at a swinging watch. So we have that procedure. We have William James talking about people with arm catalepsy or leg catalepsy, with both legs kind of sticking out in the air as a way of achieving hypnosis. Guided imagery and exorcism and many other techniques used by Pierre Janet. We had a fellow named Frederick Myers, who was a very accomplished hypnotist at that time, using shells where people would hear things in the shell, and that would put them in a trance, like a seashell, or brushing the person's skin with a feather, or gently blowing on their arm. In modern times, we had Eva Vanier, and still have Eva with us, and then Ernest Hilgard, looking at exercise bike riding as a procedure for achieving hypnosis. We have Milton Erickson telling stories, doing a handshake, ignoring a person so that they go into trance, confusing a person into hypnosis, using guilt to get a person to go into hypnosis, boredom, telling them to increase their resistance, seemingly any endless number of ways of achieving hypnosis. We have progressive relaxation that was made popular by Dave Ellman. We've got repeating positive affirmations by Emily Koo. We've got laughing, walking, these are ways in which I've done it with people, getting them who are laughing, or we go out and take a walk, or complete absence of verbal suggestion. I've worked with people who speak no English, in which everything was just done with a movement of the hands and with touch, and they experience profound results as a result of the hypnosis. We have Darren Brown, doing entertainment show hypnosis, but we have videos of him eating at a little diner where there's someone across the diner from him, and he's just starting to mirror the person's movements, and does so for about 15 or so minutes, and then walks over to the table, and the person's head is slumped in a trance, and then he suggests the person goes and takes a TV from a TV store, which he goes and does, and has no memory for any of this. We have in Tibet, we have the singing bowls, and we have people in the West that like to use the bowls that you get to do that sort of humming, vibrating sound with. I've seen Bradford Keeney achieve hypnosis using drumming. Of course, in Africa, that's been used for a long time. We have someone, it's not the famous Ivan Pavlov, but it's another person from about that same time period in Russia named Pavlov, developed the thumb on the forehead technique. And so we see that now practiced in Turkey and Pakistan, and I think Iran, where a thumb put right between the eyes on the forehead is the procedure for achieving hypnosis. So since it's hard to nail down the exact procedure, there's been arguments made that there's certain core components that are needed for it to be hypnosis. You have to have an induction, then you have to have your formal suggestion, then you have to have an awakening in order for there to be hypnosis. But those of us who practice or have been trained in Ericksonian hypnosis, know that in conversational hypnosis, there is no induction procedure. And also, if you're doing the active alert hypnosis, such as you see on the exercise bike, there is no awakening procedure. And then, of course, there can be nonverbal methods that are used in the hypnotic context, but it doesn't even involve speaking. So it's not necessarily the case that speaking is a part of hypnosis. There actually are no core components. That led first Ernest Hilgard in the 60s to come to the conclusion that the only specific ingredient of a hypnosis treatment is the label hypnosis. And now Kirsch and colleagues are also making a similar point. So what does this mean? What are we saying about hypnosis here? And my point is this. No, well, that we run the risk of a tautology when we talk about what is actually a hypnosis procedure. So a tautology is a formula or an assertion that is true in every possible interpretation. So if we say that anything that produces hypnotic behavior is hypnosis, then essentially anything can be hypnosis. So with that bit of trouble, the conclusion that I've come to is that hypnosis is polymorphic. And what that expression means essentially is that it can come in any shape or form. And practically any procedure, you can have a whistling procedure, you can have a not thinking procedure, probably you could have a tapping procedure. And if it's conducted within a hypnotic context, it will serve as hypnosis. And so essentially hypnosis can assume any form as necessitated by cultural context, clinician attributes, and individual client needs. For instance, some people need to have their eyes open. They really do need this because of fear and lack of trust. Some people need an experience that's going to be mystical and very strange. Some people need an experience that's going to be very serious. Some people need to be able to laugh. Some people need a long experience. Some people need something very short. And the beauty of hypnosis is it can morph into anything based on the therapist abilities and the client's needs. All right, so what is the next question I want to ask? Oh, we're going to get all the answers all at once on this one. And of course, I can't read it because there's something blocking my way. Now I moved it. Is hypnosis an altered state? Okay. There is no one thing that alters when we have hypnosis. What do I mean by that statement? Okay. Well, some people will know that they are truly in trance because it altered their memory. And so it's like, I don't remember anything you were saying. Some people, it's because hypnosis seemed to alter time, right? And so that you ask the person, how long do you think you're in their trance? They say only 5 minutes. And then you show them the clock and it turns out it was 40 minutes. And then they realize they truly were in a trance. They truly were hypnotized because of the experience of altered time. Sometimes it's altered sensation, right? And so a person's had a back pain. They're so bad they can't turn their back and they're suffering greatly, but you've been talking to them for a while. Or I'm thinking of a particular client where I've been talking to her for a while, and all of a sudden, well, about after 40 minutes, she starts twisting her back and moving all around, and she's like, all the pain is gone. And then she pointed a finger at me and she goes, you hypnotized me. You used Ericksonian hypnosis on me, right? And how she came to that conclusion was this altered sensation within her body. It can be altered emotions. You know, a person has this experience and says, I've never felt this peaceful. I've never felt this relaxed before in my whole life. They can have altered attributions for movement, right? Such as you suggest the hand goes up and their hand starts to raise in the air, but the person isn't attributing it to themselves that I just made my hand go up. Something outside of me made my hand go up. It's moving on its own. And so that will be recognized by the person as hypnosis. Altered self-awareness. I lost track of myself, or I felt like I was outside my own body. Altered relations. As you were speaking, your voice was inside my mind. It's as if I experienced this closeness that I've never known before. Or altered strength. A person suddenly can't lift something until you snap your fingers, then they're able to lift it. Altered expectations. I didn't think anybody could put me under. Altered central nervous system activity. You know, why did one individual I was working with, he had these kind of seizure-like movements. It's more in a Tourette style. Couldn't control his body, except when I started doing hypnosis with him, his body became still. And so now he knew the hypnosis was real because his seizure or sort of convulsive movements stopped. Altered status. You know, a person can go from being someone who can't do hypnosis to being a good hypnotic subject, and it's that change in sense of self that they know that hypnosis is working. So it's not so much that one thing, any one of these has to alter, and it's not the case that all of these have to alter for the person. There just must be something in that person's subjective experience that meaningfully alters. And what happens with that is that it starts to create what we call a mental contrast. So there was the state that I was in, and now it's being contrasted against this new state that has been achieved. And if it seems irrelevant or it seems not very special, then of course it won't have much an effect. But if the shift seems to the person extraordinary, this is not a shift in a state of awareness that I normally experience, then they will experience it as being a trance or as being hypnosis. How can we make sense of this? What's one way of thinking about this? There's this concept given to us by James in 1976, and this idea of cognitive imperative. And a cognitive imperative, it's not a conscious thing. It's something that we learn from society about action potential. And I'm not the first person to kind of look at this or talk about this. Actually, James Braid was looking at different plagues that were going on, and they were different psychogenic plagues in Europe, going all the way back to the 1500s. We had the dancing plague of 1518, lycanthropy of 1540, where people began to act like wolves, especially when the moon came out and they couldn't control wolf-like instincts within them. In the 17th century, we had tarantism, where people were getting bit by tarantulas, and once they got bit by a tarantula, they would have compulsive, uncontrollable movements, dancing hysterically, so to speak. And even some cases, like in one case, a documented case, an old man who'd had to have a cane to walk, he got bit by a tarantula and started dancing hysterically through the community and couldn't stop himself from dancing. And this was a person who previously had been unable to walk. But the cure they found was by playing certain type of music. And if people could listen to a certain type of music, it would calm them down and give them back control of their body. And of course, that's where we now get that little short piano piece, Tarantella, from, that children learn while they're learning to play the piano. We have the Tanganyika laughter epidemic of 1962. So we got some modern psychogenic epidemics. We have even more recently in 2011, the Leroy-Tourette syndrome up in the New York area, I believe, where teenagers were catching Tourette's from one another. And eventually you had a large number of children that had uncontrollable Tourette-like symptoms that they caught from one another. And so where else do we see examples of cognitive imperatives? All placebo therapies, right? The only reason taking a pill and putting it in your mouth has any effect is through social learning and this idea that people get better when they put medication in their mouths. And society as a whole expects that to happen. And then the argument could also be made that hypnosis is another form of cognitive impairment. And the idea that when normal therapy isn't working for someone, or when someone cannot control their behavior under normal means, if hypnosis is used, then they can get extraordinary outcomes, outcomes that cannot be achieved otherwise. Am I the first person to suggest that hypnosis has a lot to do with social learning? Not at all. James Braid, again, was one of the first people to suggest social learning. And his statement was that the subjective experience of trance, like psychogenic epidemics, is a byproduct of cultural conditioning, or the exact term he used was imitation. Sympathy and imitation was how he led the way in looking at response expectancies. And these are expectancies of the occurrence of non-volitional responses. So things that are normally not controlled through conscious intentional volition, such as the rate of heartbeat, or behaviors that you can't stop yourself from doing, or healing of a wart, or glove anesthesia for a surgery, or something along those lines. Response expectancies can alter these behaviors as a result of expecting it to be so. And so the theory is that socially transmitted expectancies trigger outcomes that do not seem to be under conscious control. And one example we can take from a study done in 1985 by Henry, that reported that people's preconceptions about hypnosis determined whether they reported time slowing down or speeding up, logical thought becoming easier or more difficult, the hypnotist's voice sounding closer or further away, sounds being clearer or more muffled, and so forth. And we even have I don't have it listed here, but we had a study a convincing study done by Stephen J. Lynn, looking at whether or not some of the characteristics that Milton Erickson said were innate to being in a trance, such as developing this very childlike and simplistic logic, and whether or not that always occurred. And when you went out and looked at it with subjects, whether or not they thought that way and acted that way depended on their social learning and what they expected to occur during hypnosis. So what does this all mean? I would suggest that what it means is hypnosis is an evolving social construct. In other words, its meaning and its effects are collectively defined and continue to evolve with society. And this is a really simple thing if you think of it this way. Hypnosis is not an extraordinary thing unless it's experienced by people as being extraordinary. But what is extraordinary? If you think about, what would be extraordinary to someone in the 1800s, not necessarily still going to be extraordinary to us in the century or the 1900s, right? And so as society changes, and as what we consider to be possible or normal or typical behavior starts to change, then the subjective experience or the definition of extraordinary also has to evolve and change. So if hypnosis is going to be this extraordinary experience, it's going to have to continue to evolve. And we, in fact, see the same happening with other very familiar social constructs, such as justice. And the concept of justice continues to evolve. Health. Henry James, a long time ago, pointed out that health is not something that exists in nature as a fact, like we'd say a tree or a rock, but health is essentially a social construct. And that social construct can continue to evolve. Success, what it means to be successful. All of these are examples of social constructs that are continuing to evolve. All right, what else what other question do we have here? Does hypnosis increase suggestibility? That question's been asked for a long time. Pierre Genet, who was an extraordinarily capable hypnotist, in 1889 stated that suggestibility does not vary simultaneously with somnambulism or deep trance, and does not vary in the same direction. And he then went on to quote, later in his book that was published in 1930 in English, in this book he quoted Edward Claparde, maybe, I don't know how to say that name, but in 1909, it is very doubtful whether hypnosis can be regarded as increased suggestibility. Certain subjects are more suggestible in the waking state than in the hypnotic state. Right? Then we look at modern studies. Those are some old research studies. Some modern ones have found that individuals who believe in the efficacy of hypnosis or have positive expectations about its outcomes are more likely to exhibit increased suggestibility during trance. And then here we do have a study by Lin, Rue, and Weeks in 1990 that show that individuals informed that hypnotized people can resist suggestions succeeded in resisting suggestions, whereas individuals told that hypnotized people cannot resist suggestions report diminished ability to resist the suggestions. Now, here's the important point that I want us all to recognize, because it could seem like, well, that's just a product of the hypnosis. However, the suggestion of whether or not they should respond to suggestion or can was given prior to hypnosis. So there was no trance, there was no induction procedure. There's simply a person being told how hypnotized people respond, and a set of expectations set up, and then during hypnosis, those set of expectations seem to be shaping the behavior and the person's subjective experience. In regard to suggestibility, Milton Erickson, shortly after working with Clark Hall, went on to do research with 300 subjects. And what he found was that far from making them hypersuggestible, it was found necessary to deal very gingerly with them to keep from losing their cooperation. It was often felt that they developed a compensatory negativism towards the hypnotist to offset any increased suggestibility. If there is a development of increased suggestibility, it is negligible in extent. So from the very beginning of Milton Erickson's career, he was making the argument that hypnosis does not lead to hypersuggestibility. And then in several of his other writings, Erickson would sometimes advise that the best time to offer important key suggestions would be prior to trance or even after awakening, because then the person's resistances have already been discharged during the official experience of hypnosis. Erickson also noted that sometimes it is necessary to fail during hypnosis so that you can get the failure over with and then move on to making progress. And so I'll just give you a quick example of how this kind of worked out with someone I was working with. Is a 76-year-old vet who came in maybe 3 weeks ago, and he'd endured horrific sexual abuse in childhood, and physical abuse from his father, sexual abuse from his mother, who he wouldn't name or identify other than calling her the bitch. Then he was sent to Vietnam. And in Vietnam, he suffered a tremendous amount of trauma, saw people killed in front of him, saw children killed. It was just a very bad thing. He's been struggled with suicidal ideation ever since. He's struggled with trauma ever since. He's came in and told me that he was barely holding it together. Someone had asked him at Walmart about what choices he wanted for getting pictures developed. He thought he was going to become violent. He was feeling suicidal. And after he's sharing, and he's kind of shaking, and he's in front of me, and I asked him if he wants to try hypnosis. And he responds in a skeptical tone, "I would like to try, but I don't know if you're going to be able to put me under." And so my response to him was, "I might not be able to put you under, but I might be able to put you over it. And if not over it, maybe I can at least get you out beside it. And all that you need to do is close your eyes and notice that one of your hands feels different." Because he did indeed have his hands sitting in different positions on his legs, one a little more forward, one a little more back. And I suggested, kind of looking at the hand a little closer to me, that it's becoming lighter, right? And then I mentioned that eventually it'll lift up into the air. If your unconscious mind is ready to let go of the past trauma, your hand will lift very slowly, right? And so this went on for a while with his hand not moving anywhere and me saying yes, and that's right, and very good, and exactly, yes, yes. And I was getting very excited. And then a little finger moves just a tiny moment, and I'm like, yes, that's it, that's it. And your unconscious mind has picked the hand that it wants to lift. Then eventually, with some encouragement, with him there with his eyes closed, his hand lifted about 12 inches in the air. And my statement essentially was that this means you're no longer holding on to any of that terrible baggage from the past. And this will have profound implications. All right. And so what's the shift there? I didn't really try to get him to feel sleep. I just asked him to close his eyes. There may be a shift in a sense of whether his hand's going up automatically or intentionally. So the attribution, he attributed the movement to something outside of himself. But even more so, his identity, there's an identity shift. And when he made the choice to try hypnosis and found that he could respond to hypnosis, it then became a matter of him being a good hypnotic subject and then possibly someone who's maybe I'm capable of helping, right? So we see here that the trance is really just about a matter of experiencing a shift, and then a shift in the location of his hand from down on the leg to up in the air, and then me symbolically connecting that to the choice of letting go of old baggage and getting over trauma so he could get over it. And I wasn't going to put him under. He didn't need to be put under anything. Now, did this solve all of his problems? I mean, at the end of the session, he was shaking my hand, thanking me. He said he felt really different, and he thought the hypnosis had been a very powerful thing. At the end of sessions, I tend to ask most of my clients, what was the most helpful part of the session today? And when I asked him that, he very emphatically insisted that the hypnosis was the most helpful part of the session. As it turns out, he had some medical procedures that needed to be performed. And in performing those medical procedures, the doctor did an anal exam using a finger to explore what was going on inside of him with a bladder and whatnot. Used lots of lubricant and whatnot, which left him feeling wet and violated in a very similar way to when he was a boy, being sexually abused. And this was very upsetting to him. And he came in to me talking about the bitch, meaning the doctor. And in this case, I didn't use hypnosis with him. I just pointed out that he had choices about who he might see and what care he was allowing, what he allowed to happen with his body. And building on the earlier success of the hypnosis, he exercised the choice to tell this doctor he didn't want these exams and that they would need to find a different way to provide his medical care. And the doctor did. And then he rebounded back to the place of no longer feeling violent or depressed or whatnot. And so I mentioned that as an example of someone needing to experience some sort of meaningful shift within therapy that is emotionally significant to them, which then can translate into some powerful shifts outside of therapy for how they're responding to life's challenges or the thing that's going on for them. I think there, okay. I go back to sharing this screen, the slides. All right, oh, we got all the way back to the first. All right, I didn't expect that to happen. All right, there we go. Okay. So one of the things that I would argue with this sample, this story I just gave you, is that hypnosis helps redefine the field of choice. And a person can experience major ideational shifts. Normally, when you're trying to change someone's mind about something, like what kind of person you are or how you're handling your life, we're using words, and the words represent conscious thought. And a person will go from believing one set of conscious beliefs to a new set of conscious beliefs. We call that conversion. You got converted to a new way of believing or seeing things. When we're working with unconscious phenomena, a lot of it exists outside of spoken language. And some of it, and much of it obviously is existing outside of conscious awareness and certainly outside of conscious control. So the ideational shifts that need to take place in the unconscious are non-representational. until you pair them with some sort of symbolic process or a ritual or some sort of virtual boundary. So you could say the ritual that I used with this individual was the lifting of the arm from being on his leg to being up into the air about 12 inches. That symbolic process represented an unconscious shift away from holding on to trauma to letting go of it and being able to face fairly significant challenges. I had no idea the challenges he was about to face, but he was really put to the test right after the hypnosis. And what do I mean by virtual boundary? There's a lot of research on virtual boundaries that once a person crosses a certain point, they won't turn back. Typical research is going to be like someone going to a movie theater, and before they enter the velvet lane leading to a certain ticket to go see a certain movie, if you talk to them, ask them about maybe seeing a different movie, they may change their mind and go see a different movie. Once they step inside the velvet ropes, it becomes way less likely that they will choose to go see a different movie. The same thing, and they're also, once they cross a virtual boundary, they're more likely to be committed to and be satisfied with the thing that they choose, versus if there is no virtual boundary. An example of that would be like a menu at a restaurant. If you leave the menu in front of the person throughout their meal, they'll report less satisfaction with their food and even be more likely to send it back to the kitchen than if the waiter collects the menu and takes it away, in which case a virtual boundary's been crossed. Putting a wedding ring on your finger or walking down an aisle is another virtual boundary. So within the context of hypnosis, a virtual boundary would be, of course, like the person's eyes closing. The idea is before their eyes close, we're not doing hypnosis, but once their eyes close, now you've committed to and agreed to and are experiencing hypnosis. Or once the hand levitates into the air, or whatever you end up describing, whatever set of expectations you lay forth for the person, once they cross that virtual boundary, they'll find themselves much more powerfully controlled by the circumstances and expectations and the social learning. This is what was occurring with, I remember I told you that story about the not remembering how to say it, but the problem of the spider bite. There was a bishop at the time who knew that this was psychological, knew there was no venom from the tarantula, and he wanted people to calm down. And so he agreed to submit himself to the spider bite so he could show people that it had no effect on you. The problem is, after the tarantula bit him, he started dancing uncontrollably and lost control of his body and could not get back in control of his body until the proper music was played, and then he was able to recompose himself and be normal again. And of course, we have plenty of examples, lots from Milton Erickson, but other people too, who've had someone say that they can't be hypnotized and they don't believe in hypnosis, and hypnosis doesn't work. But if you get them to go through the procedural context and start crossing the virtual boundaries, then they find themselves with automatic eye closure or hand levitation or whatever other things the person has learned to expect from hypnosis. All right, and now, what is the aim of clinical hypnosis? Intelligence or compliance? This was a piece that I wrote recently for the journal and American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis. And what are we really trying to do is, do we want our clients more compliant? And that is the thing that we're trying to make happen with hypnosis? Or are we wanting them to be able to exercise intelligence? And by intelligence, the meaning of that word is an organism's ability to solve problems. So an organism's ability to identify and define something that's not right, and then to come up with workable solutions. In stage hypnosis, we should recognize that the whole purpose of it is to create the illusion of absolute control, because that's very entertaining, can be very funny, and it's very entertaining to watch. It begins, this illusion begins with someone in the audience exercising the choice to volunteer So they volunteer and come up. That's followed by the need to prove one's willingness to comply with instructions. So they'll have a bunch of people on stage, and the hypnotist is sending people away that aren't proving themselves well. So we have selective recruitment. And then once there are a certain group of people up there acting a certain way, there's going to be a certain unconscious pressure to follow group norms, and then coupled with performance pressure to entertain the room. With all of these things combined, you can create the illusion of absolute control of one person over another. In contrast, therapists need clients to feel safe. We need them to feel respected and personally empowered. Clients are struggling with boundaries and need to feel confident that they are autonomous beings who can resist undue influence. And so efforts to create the illusion of control do not serve any of these purposes. As a result, I think that's why we've seen ourselves, at least since the 60s and 70s, shifting away from this idea of demand suggestion and prestige suggestion in hypnosis, and more to this model of relaxation, and people kind of more so feeling more comfortable and safe than they normally do. But we can go all the way back to 1814 with Abi Faria, and he see the statement that nothing comes from the magnetizer. Everything comes from the subject and takes place in his imagination. It is autosuggestion generated from within the mind of the subject. So this individual was a monk, I believe, practicing hypnosis, researching it there in Paris, and was who James Braid originally studied some and got some of his thinking from. And then according to the Catholic Encyclopedia, Faria was the first to practice suggestion in the waking state and the first to use post-hypnotic suggestion. What he recognized, of course, was that people did not have to be in a trance in order to be responding to suggestion. What is post-hypnotic suggestion, essentially? By my definition, post-hypnotic suggestion is a goal that is pursued outside of conscious awareness, with strategic planning and implementation also occurring outside of conscious awareness. So the goal that is represented in the post-hypnotic suggestion, but it's not experienced as consciously as something that they're trying to make happen. A post-hypnotic suggestion to be vague is because we want to leave plenty of room for the person to work out the solutions in their own way, in a way that's fitting to their personality and their capabilities. All right, and I'll have a couple more things I want to say about this. Whoops, there we go. Erickson developed the technique of permissive suggestion to act as a catalyst for self-organizing change, which means self-organizing change just means an organism reconfigures the self in order to better meet the challenges faced in the environment. And so in essence, permissive some action to occur, but with include. And then this maximizes the experience of autonomous choice and creativity within the client. But this pursuit of this goal and the implementation of the plan, it's all occurring outside of conscious awareness. So it seems as if the hypnotist is in charge and making this happen, which of course is an illusion. Milton Erickson made the point that permissive suggestion is not the same thing as indirect suggestion. So I'll just go ahead and make the distinction. Permissive suggestion is more about a way of doing suggestion that leaves its own solutions. Indirect suggestion, in contrast, well, to direct suggestion is simply offering of an experience, and the subject's free to accept it or reject it. The experience could be a story, it could be a metaphor, it could be just a physical act that's done in the therapy office. And Milton Erickson's belief was that individuals accept this more readily because they're not coerced or threatened. So a point here we could make is that clinical hypnosis serves primarily as a means of stimulating unconscious intelligence for problem solution and implementation of this I was about to get to see hypnosis, but then it didn't. Just kept, getting bigger and bigger. And he said, maybe I should go see a hypnotist. And I was a little nervous that my son would be frightened during the hypnosis. So each night before bed, I would tell him, this Saturday, you're going to see a man and he's going to use words to make your work go away. And then she said the embarrassing thing was that day I had to call him and cancel the session because when my son woke up that Saturday morning, the wart was gone. And so, of course, I laughed and I said, you didn't get to see hypnosis done. You performed the hypnosis yourself. And she said, what do you mean? And I was like, well, you offered him the suggestions each night that words could make the wart go away. And he just substituted your words rather than having to use someone else's. And that became a problem that was solved by him at an unconscious level. And so another version of this was told to me by Ernest Rossi. He was saying that he had seen Erickson working with a client, telling the client, first, we will try this the easy way, which is going to be hypnosis. And if that doesn't work, there is always the hard way, which would be ordeal therapy. And so with this single statement, Erickson motivated the person to find their own way to make therapy work. So my conclusion from that is that clinical hypnosis activates problem-solving processes outside of conscious awareness. And that's a key defining feature that makes it different from other approaches to therapy. To be therapeutic, I believe hypnosis must be consensual, collaborative, and permissive. And this is what contrasts with other types of hypnosis that can be harmful, such as hypnosis used by the CIA or the FSB for interrogation purposes, or hypnosis used by con artists or cult leaders, which some of these behaviors have begun to be studied, and we're seeing that they are used in harmful ways in some cases. Once again, because it's not consensual, it's not collaborative, and it's not permissive. For about a 1-year period, I was formally collecting information on a written handout and it asked several different questions of my clients. One of them was, the most helpful part of today's session was, and they had to complete the sentence with the first thing that came to mind. And on the days that I did use formal hypnosis and identified what I was doing as hypnosis, 100% of the time, people identified that as being the most helpful thing that was done. Now, that of course is not good solid research. There's no controls there. There's no double blind. That wouldn't make it to a journal. But when we do look at seriously, carefully conducted meta-analytic analysis, where we're looking at dozens and dozens of studies and putting them all together to see what they mean, we've got numerous studies showing that when you add hypnosis to other therapeutic modalities, you get greater symptom reduction, increased psychological well-being, enhanced coping abilities, and overall better patient satisfaction. There's some that have looked at surgery too, where you get better outcomes with surgery. There's just numerous studies. I just listed a few there as an example. So what we know from the research is that hypnosis is for sure a real thing. And it for sure makes therapy more effective and more beneficial to people. Something that, and this again, it's not a carefully controlled study, but in many cases, I've had access to large numbers of people that have gone through formal training, either through Erickson Foundation or people that have been trained through ACH or other training organizations. And I'll always ask, are you using the hypnosis that you learned? And in about roughly 70% of those trained in hypnosis will report that they're not using it. And when I ask why, they say, I'm afraid I'll say or do the wrong thing. And to me, the irony, of course, is that these therapists are saying and doing lots of things with the clients, just not hypnosis. So it's almost this sort of fear, I consider an irrational fear, that the person's more easily destroyed in hypnosis than they are in regular talk therapy, or that if you mess up in hypnosis, it's somehow more devastating than if you mess up in regular talk therapy. And my argument would be that when people come in and they make themselves vulnerable to an expert and start sharing things they've never shared with anyone else, they're incredibly vulnerable. And if they're complying with things that you're asking them to do, they are very vulnerable, regardless of whether or not you're officially using hypnosis. So what we want to do, of course, is always be aiming to be collaborative, to be permissive, and to make sure we have the person's consent. So it's consensual. And so I wouldn't do hypnosis with someone without first asking them, if they want to try hypnosis or if they think hypnosis is a good idea. And if the person says yes, then I ask them what they would like to hear suggested to them. Not always, but if I have concerns about, I'm not certain what the person needs at the moment, I will literally say, what do you want me to suggest to you during hypnosis? What wording would you like me to use? What do you think is going to work best with you? So then hypnosis just becomes a matter of giving people what they're asking for. And that should make it seem much less like a scary procedure. What I draw from all of the stuff I was just telling you is that hypnosis is uniquely robust. It's been around with us for over 200 years. It can morph and adapt to almost any type of care that people are needing, whether it's medical or psychological. It can be applied universally across diverse settings, within different theoretical contexts, different clinical situations in different countries. Hypnosis is not limited to specific conditions or environments, nor are its benefits limited to high hypnotizable individuals. So when we put all this together, what are we saying hypnosis is? My opinion is that hypnosis is polymorphic. It's an evolving social construct. It redefines the field of choice from conscious activities and conscious intention to something that happens outside of conscious awareness. Clinical hypnosis activates problem-solving processes outside of conscious awareness, so it activates intelligence within the individual. And hypnosis is uniquely robust. What do I believe the future of hypnosis is? While terminology may change and labels may change, the methodology will certainly change. The possibilities presented by hypnosis are likely to continue to be put to use for another 2,000 years. And that is unless AI destroys us all before we get there. So those are the slides, and that is my presentation. We can move to a Q&A session now if we'd like.
Great. So I failed to mention in the introduction that anybody who's got questions, if you could please send them to Dana, and she will then feed them to me. Dan, like I said in the introduction, there are people who can teach, and then there are people who do what they're teaching. Oh, pshaw. No, but seriously, you talk about the future of hypnosis, and you seed for there's going to be this little piece at the very end, and you move into this concept of you can't predict the future without knowing the past, and you do this elegant review of history of hypnosis that just flows out of you. It just speaks to the hours that you have spent dedicating yourself to studying this and honing your personal craft, and it's really an honor and a pleasure to bear witness to your mastery. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you, Rob. I really appreciate your comments.
Okay, well, so we have a question from Juan Hernandez. And what is the place of AI in the present of hypnosis? In 30 seconds or less, Dan.
Yeah, AI is threatening everybody's jobs, including therapists. They've just now, I saw advertised on the internet, your AI chat bot, whatever, sunglasses, so that you can be walking around, whatever, and ask AI a question and it'll answer it for you. And of course, there's going to be AI designed to address people psychologically and emotionally. This is not like super new. When computers were still really, really primitive, before there was Windows, and there was still the DOS thing, there was a professor up at, now I forget which big university, one of the big, amazing universities. We'll just say Harvard. Of course, I'm forgetting his name. but he was wanting to study the use of a computer to work with people psychologically. And so what he did is he created a very simple DOS program that would take, and this is before computers had microphones and stuff, so it's all typing. But he took Carl Rogers' method of reflective listening and created a program that would take what people are saying and then just kind of feed back to them statements about themselves, but is essentially reflective listening, statements about what they're feeling and statements about their needs and stuff. And I'm sure in a very fairly primitive way, it would just feed back to them what they're experiencing. And he was shocked and somewhat horrified by how much time people were spending with this program. They got more into it than he thought made sense, because it was like, this is a machine. It's not you're not interacting with a person, right? And so this is before there's social media. Now this doesn't surprise us because of social media. We're like, of course people can lose hours, interacting with stuff that's just virtual reality, but that didn't exist back then. And he was getting increasingly concerned about it. And then one day he came into work and he saw that his secretary had come into work early so that she could spend time with the computer before he started using it. And that so disturbed him that he pulled the plug on the project and stopped doing the whole thing, because he was afraid people were becoming too confused with what's real and what's not real. And so now, all these years later, and we have AI that's going to start understanding and knowing people's needs better than they do, right? In weird, spooky ways, right? I send a text to someone saying something about I'm going to be camping and wherever something, and next thing I know, I'm getting all these ads from Amazon and whatever about tents and camping stuff, and it's showing me stuff I'm really interested in. That's a really fascinating piece of camping accessory I do not have. And I've got my ads already know that I'm going to be traveling to Europe soon. It's like all this stuff that's being pitched to me. My phone is anticipating my needs before I'm even having time to think about them myself. And when you've got AI able to do that, and AI able to learn so extraordinarily fast, when it's set to meeting people's needs, oh geez, I don't know. No one knows. We can't predict that future because we don't have a past.
I still see people talking to themselves as they're walking down the street, and my first thought is not, oh, they're on the phone. My first thought is they're psychotic. So, with the glasses you're talking about, I think I'm really in trouble. So Brock McKay had a question, and I think, Brock, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this was related to your idea of post-hypnotic suggestion. And he was asking, is it not a phenomenon with an experiential component?
I don't totally understand the question, but I will say one of the things that I found problematic with post-hypnotic suggestion and traditional ideas of hypnosis, that you have to be in a trance. And when you're in a trance, now you have access to the person's unconscious mind. And so now it's working. But if a person's carrying out things, in everyday life and away from the hypnotist, it means trance isn't really an essential part of it. It's not necessarily the case that the person's going into a trance. It more so means that the person somehow become committed to a set of ideas that they themselves are implementing. So then my curiosity is more so, how do they become committed to these set of ideas? And is it experiential? Well, yes, it's experiential. That's what I was talking about with the boundaries. I had one person that what I was doing with him, I said, I think we need something more powerful than hypnosis. And are you willing to do something? Because he was trained in hypnosis, he was trained in Ericksonian hypnosis. None of that worked for him. He'd been to see all the famous names in Ericksonian hypnosis. None of that worked for him. I said, I think you need something more powerful than hypnosis. Are you willing to try that? And he said, well, that depends on what it is. And he says, what is it I would need to do? And I said, you would just need to trust everything I say without question. Are you willing to trust everything I say without question? And he said, I don't know. I said, well, think about it. And whenever you nod your head, then I'll know you're ready to trust whatever I have to say without question. And it took him a while, a long time. He sat there staring at me. But after, close to 10 minutes, which is a long time. You're just sitting there. He nodded his head. And I said, you do have the potential to grow and to make progress. I know that to be a fact, and I see it in you. You do have that potential, and you will when you're ready. And I saw him not too long ago. Now it's like 5 years later. 5 years later, he came up. He's a Zen monk. He was showing me this Tibetan thing he's got, and he leads these classes and he does these retreats, and he's very happy and satisfied.
Yeah.
He did it in his own way though. But yeah, it's very experiential, but it's about commitment. It's about expectations. And it's about the person's own unconscious intelligence being activated and set to work.
Hector Burgos asks, what do you think can be done at public level to increase the interest and mainstream positioning of clinical hypnosis as opposed to entertainment?
Yeah, I hear that question asked a lot in different forums. And I hear, the basic answer I hear most people saying is, you just got to work really hard at making this happen. Like, go to your hospital that you work at, or go to, the whatever you have access to, use that to get the word out, and offer some workshops, or write some articles, write an article for the New Yorker, or it's really about people who find benefit in doing it, looking to what avenues they have to communicate to a larger society, and doing that communicating. But it's just a lot of work, really.
Akira Otani talks about how in the 70s and 80s, the Krishnas in Chicago's O'Hare Airport were considered a nuisance. And now mindfulness is one of the most popular concepts out there. And how did it go from being, these people that were harassing people in the airport to being one of the most popular, processes going on in mental health? And
yeah. It's, this is with Darwin and Nietzsche. There was this huge disruption at least in Western culture, around the idea of religion, whether or not it's acceptable. And the idea was that if you're going to be a science-based person, you can't embrace religion. And that kind of carried forward for a while. Then there was concerns going into the 20th century about whether people would lose all morality and all self-control now that they've learned that God is dead, and all these things. And it was expected that religion would be gone by the 1920s or 30s. But it, to this day, remains not gone. And then you had people, certainly Viktor Frankl, well, no, Jung. You had Jung before Viktor Frankl arguing that spirituality is a necessary part of human intelligence and human experience in life. Then you had Frankl arguing that very eloquently and proposing logotherapy, that therapy need to have a spiritual element. The academics that used to call themselves behaviorists are going to be the last to come around to wanting to think that way. They then evolved into becoming cognitive behavioral therapists, still primarily academics, not really keen on the idea of talking about God. But then they found Buddhism. And Buddhism is spiritual, and it can be very religious. They just don't go into detail about defining God. They don't use the G word quite so much. And so cognitive behavioral therapy seems to be embracing mindfulness. It seems to be it's a safe way of embracing spirituality in clinical practice. At least that's my.
I don't know if you remember the series with Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyer, The Power of Myth. And Joseph Campbell is talking about how, cultures or communities that lived by the water had origin histories that were related to things that came out of the water, and those that were in landlocked areas had origin stories. And I think that it's just human nature that we look around our environment and we look to find a way to explain it to ourselves and to create a narrative. And if you want to go to spirituality for that, okay.
Since we're having fun with this topic, I'll go a little further with the discussion. Viktor Frankl did a really nice job of distinguishing the questions that are asked, right? So human consciousness is made for problem solving. That's what we do with human consciousness, especially consciousness, where we're looking analytically at things. But and looking analytically, we're actually essentially asking questions and then seeking answers. That's a big part of at least conscious problem solving. And Viktor Frankl pointed out that with science and then religion, we're answering two different questions. And with science, we're more looking at how. How does this work? How does the sun go from one side of the earth to the other? Or how are babies made, or whatever? How do cancer cells metastasize? And he said science is very good at answering these how questions, which he considered horizontal. He said the vertical question is the why. Why has to do with meaning. And he said science cannot address meaning. You can be the smartest, most capable scientist in the world and be so depressed you want to die and suffering from existential depression, not because you're not successful, not because you're not professor emeritus or whatnot, but because you have no meaning in your life, right? So I kind of like that concept. I would just build on it by saying, when he's saying why, I would say it answers, spirituality really does address the questions of identity and purpose. And so through various forms of religion, people get those needs met, identity needs and sense of purpose or meaning. Where with science, it really is focused on a different question. That's more causal chains. So what are the causal relations between events? So we understand how things work.
I feel an obligation to our audience to move on, as much as I enjoy hanging out.
Yeah.
Eric Prosher is asking, first of all, he comments, a great presentation. I think everybody agrees with him on that one. Kirsch mentioned 7 modern studies that show that suggestion isn't necessarily improved by hypnosis. You also make this point. However, you ask your patient what they once suggested, despite your point that hypnosis isn't necessarily about suggestion. How do you make sense of this? What role does case formulation play in your hypnosis work?
Yeah, it's, there's some people that will even argue because suggestion understanding how, because something occurs naturally, it means there's no such thing of it in hypnosis. People have long since argued that trance of hypnosis, but just because trance occurs when you're standing on a beautiful mountain or staring into a lake, glistening water, it doesn't necessarily mean there's no such thing as hypnosis. Hypnosis becomes the art very in all contexts. Is the response always compliance? Now, here's what we need to understand where we make a distinction. Do people always comply with what they hear? No, right? A woman came to me wanting hypnosis for her knee because she didn't want to have to do knee surgery, and they were telling her maybe she have to do knee surgery. She want to try hypnosis first. And so I said, well, let's test your responsiveness to hypnosis. I'm going to put a little thermometer on your finger and measure your finger temperature while I'm talking to you. I had her close her eyes and relax, and then suggesting their finger could get warmer and warmer, and and I'm telling her, she can see herself putting her finger over fire, and the flames are warming it. It's just getting colder. It dropped by 10 degrees, and then by 15 degrees, and then her fingers started turning white. And I was concerned, but I'm just trucking along, suggesting that her finger's getting warmer, and very good. That's exact. Yes, very, very good. You have a very powerful unconscious mind. And I said, and now it can keep getting colder and colder and colder. And then the finger started warming up. I was like, that's so good, very good, colder yet, and it got warmer, warmer. It caught back up to where it was, and then the temperature did rise above baseline, not as dramatically as it dropped, but it did get warmer than when we had started. So after the hypnosis was done, and then I suggested that her knee would heal in her own way, at her own time.
Oppositionally.
Yeah, her knee would clearly heal as she needs it to, when she needs it to. And she opened her eyes and she laughed and she said, I knew you understood me and how my mind works the minute you shifted and started going in the other direction. She goes, I've been trying to tell my husband that. He keeps telling me I have to do something. I have to do something. I tell him, stop doing that. You're making it more impossible for me. Tell me I can't do it, then I'll be able to do it. So, was she highly suggestible? Actually, not. She's not highly suggestible in that she wasn't more and more compliant. Was she highly responsive? She's super responsive. She was super responsive to hypnosis. And so when I'm working with someone, I'm not looking for compliance to suggestion. I'm looking under what circumstances can they respond in a way that's going to be meaningful and beneficial to that person. And then I will set the stage for them to be able to respond in a way that's helpful.
You were struggling to come up with what university and what was the research, and Patrick Myers reminds us that ELIZA is an early natural language processing computer programming created from 1964 to 66 at MIT by Joseph Weizenbaum, created to explore communication between humans and machines. So thank you, Patrick. We appreciate the wisdom of this audience.
Yeah, I went back even further than I thought. I was going to say that early, but yeah, okay. Wow, MIT.
So Ellen Cohen says stage hypnosis gets a bad rap, but I volunteered as an experiment for myself to see if I could if I had control over what suggestions to comply with, and I learned that I did, but I didn't feel coerced at all. I thoroughly enjoyed the experience of feeling my shoe was a puppy and wanting to pet it.
Well, maybe that person was following the rules that I was suggesting are important for an experience to be therapeutic. You need to feel definitely that you're consenting to this, and that's collaborative, and that you have some freedom of choice while experiencing it.
And our good friend Rick Goodling just tosses out there's a difference between being mindful and mindfully buttonholing people for money.
Oh, I like that.
And then Eric again says, art equals subjectivity, science equals objectivity, religion equals intersubjectivity.
Ooh. Oh, we got more on the religion front. Nice. I like that.
Yeah. So that's kind of it for questions at the moment.
Okay. So just to clarify, I'll make one more point in case someone's saying, well, are you saying there's no such thing as hypnosis? Or are you, arguing against the ways in which we currently do hypnosis? No, I'm not at all. My main point is it's one of the most effective procedures available to us for even for surgery and whatnot, not as a standalone procedure, but as an adjunct to improve surgery outcomes or to improve weight loss or to improve smoking cessation or whatever it is that the person's working on. It's very valuable, it's very powerful, and it's very real, but we do need to update and modernize our way of conceptualizing and teaching hypnosis, because if we don't, it's gonna really limit us. And it's gonna make us less able to use hypnosis in a flexible way that meets the needs of different cultures and different societies or different individual patients.
Gail Kalin, and this may be our last question before we go into a breakout room. Gail Kalin asked on behalf of Murray, why would mirroring induce trance?
Yeah, isn't that something? I saw a workshop down in France, and Gerard, I can't remember his last name. Him and his wife, he's a physician, she's a nurse, and they do emergency work where there's like an auto wreck or something, and they come out to the crash site, and they're using hypnosis right away with individuals as the paramedics are working on them. And a lot of what they do is mirroring, and they had actually taken it from a study of NLP and developed it and made it more into a formal hypnosis procedure. But just keep in mind, it's not a procedure, and it's not even 10 procedures or 100 procedures. It's potentially a limitless number of procedures that can be used to a certain effect when your expectations are in a certain place, the other person's expectations are in a certain place, and there is some degree of social learning around what this means for our behaviors and the results that are going to come from it.
And like I said in the beginning, it's really a treat to get to spend time with you and to have you share your wisdom. Thank you so much. I'm going to toss it back to Dana and Peter, who are going to tell us what we're going to do after this. But thank you for your time and your wisdom. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Rob. Pleasure's mine.
Was said at the very start, risking making a fool of yourself. Well, we are so honored that you risked making a fool of yourself with us. We enjoyed every moment of it. And Rob, thank you too for the discussion at the end with the lovely questions. This was indeed a wonderful evening. And I know, just to cap things off, there's not much time left, but we're just gonna, it'll be like a hypnomixer discussion, quick 10 minutes, 9:15, 9:25 back here, and then we'll just wrap things up. But I'm really curious to hear what others are thinking. So Christina, I mean, with all these ideas, insights that Dan has suggested that are floating around, would love to go into a breakout room and listen to what everybody else is thinking and feeling as well.